The Sterling estate did not merely occupy space, it dominated the landscape, a sprawling kingdom of manicured hedges and cold, white stone that seemed to judge anyone who dared to walk its gravel paths without an invitation. For Lily, returning to this place felt less like coming home and more like stepping back into a pair of shoes that had never quite fit. She stood in the center of the immense, climate-controlled garage, the air thick with the sense of high-octane gasoline, expensive carnauba wax, and the damp, earthy smell of the relentless autumn rain drumming against the skylights. This was her father's domain. For 30 years, Arthur had been the invisible hands on the steering wheel, the silent shadow in the front seat of the Sterling family's life. He was the chauffeur, a man who knew every secret route in the city and every secret whispered in the back seat, yet remained as mute as the leather upholstery. Lily had grown up in the small, modest apartment above this garage, watching the Sterling children play from her window, separated by an invisible line drawn in money and blood. She was 24 now, no longer the shy girl with scraped knees who hid behind the tool chests. She was a woman who had fought to build a life outside these gates, studying literature on scholarships, scrubbing dishes in diners to pay for books, desperate to be more than just the help's daughter. But life has a cruel way of circling back. Her father's sudden illness, a persistent, hacking cough that rattled his thin frame, had pulled her back into the orbit of the Sterlings. Arthur was too proud to ask for sick leave, terrified of being replaced after 3 decades of service. So, Lily had done the only thing a daughter could do. She had put on the spare uniform. She had pulled her long, chestnut hair into a tight, severe bun, hidden under the stiff chauffeur's cap. She had agreed to drive. The glass that separates the driver from the passenger is the thickest wall in the world. It was just past 7 in the evening when the call came. The internal line on the garage wall buzzed with a jarring, mechanical sound. Mr. Sterling needed a ride to the opera house. Not the old Mr. Sterling, who had been kind in a distant way, but Carter. Carter Sterling, the heir. The name alone made Lily's stomach tighten. She remembered him as the golden boy who used to race sports cars down the driveway, leaving clouds of dust for her to choke on. He was the prince of the estate, arrogant, beautiful, and utterly unaware of her existence. He had looked through her for 20 years, seeing a prop in his background rather than a person. Lily checked her reflection in the side mirror of the black Phantom limousine. The cap cast a shadow over her eyes, obscuring her face. Good. She needed to be invisible. She needed to be Arthur. She slid into the driver's seat, the leather creaking softly, and engaged the engine. It purred to life, a vibration that felt like a secret heartbeat. She pulled the car around to the main portico, the rain lashing against the windshield, blurring the world into streaks of silver and gray. The heavy oak front doors opened, and he emerged. Carter Sterling had changed. The boyish arrogance had hardened into something sharper, colder. He wore a tuxedo that fit him like armor, his posture rigid, his face a mask of bored detachment. At 28, he carried the weight of the Sterling empire on shoulders that seemed too tense to relax. He didn't look at the driver. He didn't nod. He simply opened the back door, slid into the sanctuary of the rear cabin, and closed the world out. Lily let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. He hadn't noticed. To him, the driver was just an extension of the machine, a mechanism to get from point A to point B. She eased the car down the winding driveway, her eyes flicking nervously to the rearview mirror. Carter was looking out the window, his jaw set, rubbing a thumb over his temple as if nursing a headache that never went away. He pulled a silver flask from his jacket pocket, took a quick, sharp drink, and then leaned his head back against the seat, closing his eyes. He looked exhausted, not the physical exhaustion of labor, but the soul-deep weariness of a man living a life he hadn't chosen. For the first time, Lily saw a crack in the perfection. They merged onto the highway, the rhythmic thump-thump of the wipers keeping time with her racing heart. The silence in the car was absolute, a heavy, pressurized vacuum. Lily focused on the road, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. She was doing it. She was invisible. Then, the partition glass hummed. Carter lowered the divider an inch. "Arthur," he said, his voice deep and raspy, without opening his eyes. "Don't take the highway. Take the coastal road. I need to see the ocean. I don't care if I'm late." Lily froze. If she spoke, the illusion would shatter. She simply nodded, hoping he would see the movement in his periphery, and signaled the turn. She guided the massive car toward the cliffs, where the sea crashed violently against the rocks below. The road was darker here, intimate. Carter opened his eyes and looked at the rearview mirror, expecting to see the gray hair and familiar, wrinkled eyes of her father. Instead, his gaze locked onto hers. It was a fraction of a second, caught in the reflection of glass. He saw eyes that were not old and tired, but hazel, wide and luminous with fear. He saw a stray lock of hair that had escaped the cap, curling against a neck that was smooth and pale. Carter frowned, leaning forward. The lethargy vanished, replaced by a sharp, predatory confusion. He didn't recognize her, yet he knew he had seen those eyes before, perhaps in the background of his childhood, perhaps in the periphery of his life. "You're not Arthur," Carter stated, the realization hanging in the air like smoke. Lily's heart hammered against her ribs. She tightened her grip on the wheel, keeping her eyes fixed on the winding road ahead, terrified to look back at the mirror. "No, sir," she whispered, her voice soft but clear, cutting through the hum of the engine. "Arthur is indisposed." Carter didn't recoil. He didn't demand she stop. He sat frozen, staring at the back of her head, staring at the eyes in the mirror that refused to meet his. For the first time in his life, Carter Sterling wasn't just looking at a driver. He was seeing the woman behind the wheel. And in the quiet intimacy of the rain-swept car, that single glance shifted the axis of his world. He had expected a ghost, but he had found a pulse. And now he couldn't look away. The silence that followed Carter's realization was heavier than the storm raging outside. Inside the limousine, the air grew tight, charged with a sudden, suffocating awareness. Lily kept her eyes fixed on the asphalt, the windshield wipers slicing through the rain like a metronome counting down the seconds to her dismissal. She expected anger. She expected him to pick up the intercom and demand to be taken back to the estate, to demand a real driver. Instead, Carter leaned forward. The leather of the seat groaned under his shift in weight, a sound that felt intimate in the quiet cabin. "Turn off the intercom," he said, his voice no longer filtered through the speaker, but muffled by the glass partition. "I don't want to talk to a machine." Lily hesitated, her hand trembling as she pressed the button that lowered the glass divider completely. The barrier was gone. Now, there was nothing between them but 3 feet of air and a lifetime of social stratification. "Who are you?" Carter asked. He wasn't looking at the road. He was watching the back of her neck, tracing the stray curl of chestnut hair that had escaped her cap. "I'm Lily," she answered, her voice steady despite the hammering in her chest. "Arthur's my father. He has the flu." He was afraid to lose his shift. "Lily," Carter repeated the name, testing its weight on his tongue. He frowned, a flicker of memory igniting behind his eyes. "The girl in the window. You used to read on the fire escape above the garage. I saw you." Lily's breath hitched. He had seen her. For years, she thought she was part of a scenery, as unnoticed as the ivy climbing the brick walls. To know that the golden boy of the estate had been watching the chauffeur's daughter felt like a violation and a validation all at once. "I didn't think you looked down, sir," she replied, a subtle challenge in her tone. Carter let out a short, humorless laugh. "I look down plenty, Lily. It's the only place where people seem real." He turned to look out the window again. The car was hugging the coastline now, the dark ocean churning violently below the cliffs. The headlights cut through the mist, illuminating the jagged rocks. Stop the car, Carter commanded suddenly. Lily frowned. Sir, we are miles from the opera house. You'll be late. I don't care about the opera, he snapped, the tension in his voice snapping like a dry twig. Pull over. Now. Lily guided the massive vehicle onto a gravel lookout point. Before the car had even come to a full stop, Carter had opened the door. The wind howled, carrying the scent of salt and ozone into the plush interior. He stepped out into the rain, his tuxedo shoes sinking into the wet gravel. He didn't run for cover. He walked to the edge of the cliff, standing dangerously close to the drop, letting the rain soak his expensive jacket. Lily watched him through the windshield. He looked like a man standing on the edge of the world, debating whether to jump or fly. Duty dictated she stay in the car. But something else, a pull she couldn't name, forced her hand. She turned off the engine, grabbed a large black umbrella from the driver's side door and stepped out. Silence is a language the lonely speak fluently. She walked up behind him, opening the umbrella to shield him. Carter didn't turn around, but he sensed the break in the rain. I didn't ask for that, he murmured, staring into the black abyss of the sea. It's part of the job, sir, Lily replied, her uniform already damp, holding the shelter over him while she stood exposed to the elements. The job, Carter scoffed. He turned to face her. In the dim light of the headlamps, the distance between them vanished. He was wet, his hair plastered to his forehead, his eyes dark with a chaotic mix of anger and longing. He looked at her, really looked at her, standing in her ill-fitting driver's uniform, shivering but unyielding. You're freezing, Lily. I'm fine, she lied. You're lying, he countered. He reached out, his hand hovering near the collar of her jacket, a gesture so shocking it made the world stop spinning. He didn't touch her, but the intent was there. Why are you doing this? Driving a car you can't afford, wearing a uniform that isn't yours, protecting a man who doesn't know you. Because my father needs this job, Lily said, her hazel eyes locking onto his, refusing to look away. And because some of us don't have the luxury of being late to the opera just because we're sad. The words hung in the air, sharp and true. Carter looked stunned. No one spoke to him like that. Everyone in his life curated their words, polished them until they were shiny and meaningless. Her honesty was a blade, and he leaned into it. I'm not sad, Lily, Carter whispered, stepping closer, invading her personal space. The scent of his cologne, sandalwood and expensive whiskey, mixed with the smell of the rain. I'm suffocating. There is a difference. For a moment, in the roaring wind, the chauffeur's daughter and the heir were just a man and a woman standing in the storm. The tension was electric, a magnetic pull of two souls recognizing the same hunger in each other. He looked at her lips, then up to her eyes, and Lily felt a terrifying urge to drop the umbrella and close the gap. But the moment broke. Carter's phone buzzed in his pocket, a relentless, jarring reminder of who he was. He pulled it out, looked at the screen, and his face hardened back into the mask of the sterling air. Take me back, he said, his voice cold again, turning away from her. Not to the opera, to the estate. I'm done performing for the night. The drive back was agonizingly silent, but the dynamic had shifted. When Lily parked the car in front of the main house, Carter didn't get out immediately. He sat in the back, watching her through the open partition. Don't let Arthur drive tomorrow, Carter said, his hand on the door handle. I have a meeting in the city at 9. I want you. Lily's heart plummeted. Sir, I can't. I have classes. And my father. I want you, Carter repeated, absolute and final. He stepped out of the car, leaving the door open, leaving her breathless in the driver's seat. Lily drove the limousine back to the garage, her hands shaking on the wheel. She thought the encounter was over. She parked the car, wiped down the leather, and climbed the narrow stairs to the small apartment above. She found her father asleep, his breathing rasping and shallow. She changed out of the uniform, pulling on a worn sweater, trying to scrub the feeling of Carter's gaze from her skin. But the night wasn't over. An hour later, a knock echoed on the flimsy door of the garage apartment. It wasn't the heavy hand of security. It was rhythmic, hesitant. Lily opened the door. Carter Sterling stood on the metal landing. He had shed the tuxedo jacket, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, soaked through from the rain. He wasn't the master commanding a servant. He was a man who had walked across the wet grounds of his estate to find the one thing that felt real. "I forgot something," he said, his voice rough, his eyes scanning her modest living room, seeing the poverty and the warmth she lived in. "You didn't leave anything in the car, sir," Lily whispered, clutching the doorframe. "No," Carter said, stepping over the threshold, entering her world, crossing the final, fatal line between their classes. "I forgot to ask if you were real, or if I just imagined the only person who has ever dared to tell me the truth." He stood in her tiny kitchen, filling the space with his presence, and Lily realized with a jolt of fear and desire that the glass wall hadn't just been lowered. It had been shattered, and now she was standing amidst the shards with a man who looked ready to bleed just to feel something. For 7 days, the world existed only inside the black Phantom limousine. The coastal road became their confessional, the leather seats their pew. Carter invented reasons to be driven, meetings that didn't exist, inspections of properties he had no intention of buying. With the partition down, the silence between them was replaced by a murmured, desperate intimacy. They spoke of everything and nothing. His fear of becoming his father, her dream of writing novels, the way the light hit the ocean at dusk. Lily allowed herself to forget the uniform. She allowed herself to believe that the way he looked at her, with a hunger that bordered on worship, was enough to bridge the canyon between their lives. Hope is a dangerous architect. It builds palaces on quicksand. The illusion shattered on a Friday afternoon. The Sterling estate was buzzing with preparation for the annual shareholders' gala. The air smelled of expensive lilies and impending judgment. Lily was in the main house, tasked by the housekeeper to deliver a set of documents to Carter's study. She walked the marble corridors, feeling less like an intruder and more like a woman carrying a secret that made her smile. She reached the heavy mahogany doors of the study. They were slightly ajar. She raised her hand to knock, but the sound of her own name froze her in place. "Chauffeur's daughter, Carter." "Really?" "It's practically a cliché." It was his mother, Victoria Sterling. Her voice was not raised. It was a cool, surgical instrument designed to cut without leaving a mess. "It's not like that, Mother," Carter's voice replied. He sounded tired, cornered. "Don't insult my intelligence," Victoria snapped. "The staff talks. You're spending hours in that car. It's embarrassing, Carter. But more importantly, it's dangerous. We're weeks away from the merger with the Kensington Group. If they think you're distracted by a dalliance with the help, they will pull out." Lily stood paralyzed, clutching the documents to her chest. She waited for him to defend her. She waited for the man who had stood in her tiny kitchen and looked at her with such raw vulnerability to claim her. "She is just a driver," Carter said. The words were flat, measured, cold. "I am bored, Mother," he continued, his voice slipping into that old, arrogant drawl she hadn't heard in a week. "She's a novelty, a way to pass the time between meetings. Don't read poetry into a simple transaction. I'm not going to throw away the empire for a mechanic's daughter." The sound of a heart breaking is the quietest sound in the world. Lily didn't hear the rest. She didn't hear that his voice cracked on the last word, or that he was gripping the edge of his desk, so hard his knuckles were white, trying to throw his mother off the scent to protect Arthur's job. She only heard the betrayal. A novelty. A transaction. She placed the documents on the floor outside the door. She didn't slam it. She didn't scream. She turned and walked back down the long, empty corridor, her footsteps silent on the plush carpet. With every step, she rebuilt the wall he had torn down. She buttoned her jacket. She adjusted her cap. She killed the woman. He had woken up and resurrected the ghost. When Carter came to the garage that evening, escaping the house to find her, the atmosphere had shifted. The air was frigid. Lily was washing the limousine, her movements mechanical, violent. "Lily!" Carter started, stepping toward her, a smile of relief on his face. "I got out. Let's go to the cliffs. I need to explain." "The car is clean, sir," Lily said. She didn't look at him. She stared at her reflection in the polished black metal. Her face was a mask of stone. Carter froze. "Lily, what's wrong?" "I am not Lily, sir," she whispered, turning to face him. Her hazel eyes were dead, devoid of the light he had ignited. "I am the driver. The novelty. The help." Carter's face paled. He realized instantly what had happened. "You heard. In the study. Lily, I had to say that. She was threatening your father's pension. I was protecting you. You were protecting your comfort." She cut him off, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "You made me feel seen, Carter. That was the cruelest part. You let me believe I was real to you. But in that room, when it mattered, I was just a mechanic's daughter. It was a lie." Carter pleaded, reaching for her hand. Lily stepped back, flinching as if his touch were fire. "No, sir. The drive to the cliffs was the lie. The study was the truth." She walked to the wall and grabbed the keys to the Phantom. She tossed them to him. He caught them instinctively, the metal cold against his palm. "I won't be driving you tonight," Lily said, her voice breaking on the finality of the sentence. "My father will be back tomorrow. Until then, you can drive yourself to your empire. I'm done being your pastime." She turned and walked up the stairs to her apartment, closing the flimsy door with a soft, definitive click. Carter stood alone in the vast, smelling garage, holding the keys to a kingdom that suddenly felt like a prison. The glass wall was back up, and this time it was bulletproof. The separation was absolute, leaving him with the echoing silence of his own lie. The night of the shareholders' gala arrived, draping the sterling estate in aggressive opulence. Chandeliers blazed in every window, mocking the darkness of the garage where Lily was methodically folding her life into cardboard boxes. She was leaving. She couldn't stay in the shadow of the man who had reduced her to a novelty. Her father, Arthur, was resting in the bedroom, frail and unaware that his daughter was severing their lifeline to the estate. Lily taped a box shut, the sound sharp and final. Suddenly, the garage door rolled up with a mechanical groan. She turned, expecting Arthur. Instead, she saw Carter. He was dressed for the gala in a tuxedo that cost more than her father made in a year, but he looked like a man walking to the gallows. His tie was crooked, his eyes bloodshot. He didn't look at the limousine waiting to take him to his coronation. He walked straight to the stairs and climbed them, ignoring the mud ruining his polished shoes. Lily met him at the door of the apartment. "I told you," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm not driving you." "I know," Carter replied, his voice hoarse. "I didn't come for a driver. I came to tell you the truth. The real truth." "I heard the truth in the study," Lily snapped, reaching to close the door. Carter stopped it with his hand. He didn't push. He just held it. "You heard a hostage negotiation, Lily. You didn't hear the ransom." He stepped inside, filling the small space with the scent of rain and desperation. "My mother didn't just threaten the pension. She knows about Arthur's lungs. She knows he needs a specialist, not just a GP. She threatened to cut the company health insurance effective immediately if I didn't merge with Kensington. If I didn't stop seeing you." Lily froze. The air left the room. She looked at the closed bedroom door where her father slept, his cough a constant background noise to her life. She hadn't known the severity. She hadn't known that Carter was the only thing standing between her father and a medical catastrophe. We judged the armor, never asking about the wounds underneath. You lied to save him," she whispered, the anger draining out of her, replaced by a crushing wave of guilt. I lied to buy us time, Carter corrected, stepping closer. I play the part of the arrogant heir because it was the only language she understands. I had to make her believe I didn't care, so she wouldn't destroy the people I do care about. He reached into his tuxedo pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This is Arthur's new contract. It's an independent annuity. It's irrevocable. My mother can't touch his health care, no matter what I do tonight. Lily looked at the paper, then up at his eyes. They were wide, open, and terrified. He had secured her father's safety before coming to her. He had removed the leverage. What are you going to do tonight? Lily asked, sensing the dangerous energy radiating off him. I'm going to the gala, Carter said, his jaw tightening. And I'm going to tell the Kensington board that the deal is off. I'm going to dismantle the merger. It will cost me the CEO seat. It will cost me the estate. But I can't live behind that glass wall anymore, Lily. Not if you're on the other side of it. It was a declaration of war against his own legacy. He was choosing her and the truth over the empire. The novelty was about to cost him everything, and he was paying the price willingly. Lily looked at the man she had judged, the man she had loved in the quiet of the coastal road. She saw the fear in his hands and the steel in his spine. You can't go alone, she said softly. They'll eat you alive. I don't have a driver, Carter smiled, a faint, sad curve of his lips. And I don't trust anyone else with the wheel. Lily didn't hesitate. She grabbed the chauffeur's cap from the hook by the door, the symbol of her servitude, and looked at it. Then she dropped it into the trash can. She grabbed her coat instead. I'll drive, Lily stated, walking past him to the stairs. But not as Arthur, and not as the help. She turned back to him, her hazel eyes blazing with a fierce, protective light. I'm driving you as the woman who knows who you really are. Carter let out a breath, a sound of profound relief, and followed her down. They walked to the limousine, but this time he didn't get in the back. He opened the front passenger door and sat down. Lily slid into the driver's seat. There was no partition between them now. No glass. No secrets. Just two people in the front seat, side by side, ready to drive into the storm of the century. The engine roared to life, not as a service to a master, but as a getaway car for two souls finally breaking free. The arrival of the Black Phantom at the Sterling Gala was usually a choreographed ballet of wealth and deference. Valets rushed, cameras flashed, and the separation between the served and the servers was absolute. But tonight, the rhythm of the empire broke. The limousine did not glide to a smooth stop at the foot of the red carpet. It halted abruptly, slightly askew, driven not by a ghost in a cap, but by a woman with wind-blown hair and a coat that had seen better winters. The silence that fell over the gathered press and guests was instantaneous. It wasn't the silence of awe, it was the silence of confusion. It deepened when the front doors opened. Carter Sterling didn't emerge from the back seat, nursing a drink and a headache. He stepped out of the passenger side, his tuxedo jacket unbuttoned, his face alive with a terrifying, exhilarating clarity. At the same moment, Lily stepped out of the driver's side. They met at the hood of the car. There was no hesitation. Carter reached out and took her hand, not in secret, not in the shadows of the garage, but under the blinding glare of 1,000 flashbulbs. He laced his fingers through hers, a public nodding of their lives that signaled the end of his era. They walked up the stairs, past the stunned valets, past the whispers that hissed like steam. Inside, the ballroom was a cavern of gold, leaf, and crystal, suffocating in its own opulence. The air smelled of expensive perfume and stale ambition. When Carter and Lily entered, the crowd parted, instinctively making way for the anomaly. Victoria Sterling stood at the center of the room, holding a flute of champagne like a weapon. When she saw them, her son holding hands with the chauffeur's daughter, her porcelain mask finally cracked. She marched toward them, her heels clicking a sharp, angry rhythm on the marble. "Have you lost your mind?" Victoria hissed, ignoring Lily entirely, staring only at Carter. The Kensington board is waiting in the library. Get rid of the girl. Fix your tie. This is a coronation, Carter, not a circus. Carter looked at his mother. For years, her voice had been the only compass he knew. But tonight, looking at her frantic need for control, he felt nothing but pity. There is no coronation, Mother, Carter said, his voice calm, carrying over the hushed murmurs of the crowd. I already sent the email. I declined the merger, and I resigned from the board. Victoria went pale, clutching her pearls as if they were the only thing holding her together. You walked away. For what? For her. She cast a look of pure venom at Lily. She is nobody, Carter. She is the help. She is the only person who looked at me and didn't see a bank account, Carter replied, squeezing Lily's hand. And she is the only reason Arthur is going to live a long, retired life with the annuity I secured this morning. You can't hurt them any more, Victoria. The leverage is gone. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the keys to the Phantom, the symbol of the heavy, insulated life he had dragged around for 28 years. He placed them gently into his mother's trembling hand. You can drive yourself home, Carter said softly. I'm done sitting in the back seat. He didn't wait for a response. He turned to Lily, a question in his eyes. She nodded. They turned their backs on the gold, the crystal, and the legacy and walked out. They didn't run. They walked with a steady, unhurried pace of people who have nowhere to be but with each other. They walked out of the estate gates and down the coastal road, leaving the lights of the mansion behind them. The night air was cool and smelled of the ocean, salt cleansing the perfume from their lungs. They walked until their feet hurt, until the estate was just a glowing speck in the distance. They ended up at a small, all-night diner on the edge of the cliffs, a place with flickering neon lights and cracked vinyl seats, a place where no one knew the name Sterling. They sat in a booth by the window, watching the moonlight dance on the dark water. Carter looked at Lily across the table. He looked stripped down, exhausted, and completely at peace. He reached across the Formica table, tracing the line of her jaw with his thumb. I have nothing, Carter said, a small smile playing on his lips. No title, no trust fund. I think I technically own a watch and a very expensive tuxedo that is currently ruined. You have Arthur, Lily smiled, covering his hand with hers. He's going to be furious you quit, but he'll get over it once he sees you happy. And you have your hands on the wheel now. I have you, Carter corrected her. That's everything. The journey wasn't over. They had a difficult road ahead. A life to build from scratch, bills to pay, a world to navigate without the buffer of wealth. But as they sat there, two refugees from a gilded cage, the truth of what they had escaped settled over them. The glass that separates the driver from the passenger is the thickest wall in the world. They had repeated that phrase in their minds for years, believing it to be an immutable law of their universe. But tonight, they had proven that glass is fragile. It shatters the moment you decide that the person on the other side matters more than the destination. I never noticed you, Carter whispered, looking at her with a reverence that made her heart ache. All those years. You were right there. You noticed me when it mattered, Lily replied softly. You saw me in the mirror. Carter shook his head. I don't need the mirror anymore. I have the view right here. They sat in the quiet diner, the world restarting around them. The chauffeur's daughter and the fallen heir, bound not by a contract or a route, but by the courageous choice to stop the car and step out into the rain. The estate on the hill would continue its cold, mechanical rotation of wealth and image, but down here, by the sea, life was messy, uncertain, and beautifully real. Carter Sterling had spent his life being driven to destinations he didn't choose, but as he kissed Lily's hand under the hum of the neon light, he knew he had finally arrived. He spent his life watching the world through a window, never realizing that the only journey worth taking was the one that led him to the woman who held the keys to his heart all along.